Greek shipping and Posidonia, why being the nice guy doesn't pay in container shipping, and who coughs up for the cleanup in an alternative fuel spill. Hi, it's Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News here, with our June news roundup, Maritime in Minutes, and I'm joined by our correspondent, Gary Howard. It's been a busy old month events-wise, with Gary attending shipping's mega bash of Posidonia in Greece, whilst I was in Rotterdam for the more niche TOC Europe event covering ports and terminals. So Gary, how was Posidonia this year?
Hi Marcus, thanks for the intro. Posidonia was sunny, it was hot, and it was very busy. The show was, I think, the largest ever in terms of the number of exhibitors and visitor numbers as well. And there were plenty of stories from the show floor and various conferences and events that sort of span the whole of Athens during Posidonia. I was on site with the Seatrade Maritime News team. We produced the show daily newspaper Posidonia Today. We put together 5 great editions, which you can find along with all of our other coverage from Posidonia on Seatrade Maritime News. Just look for the event coverage in the top navigation bar, and Posidonia 2024 is right there at the top of the list. So I picked out a story from Nick Savides. He was part of our team on the ground in Athens, and he wrote a nice little roundup of the mood at Posidonia, looking at the big Greek ship owners' stance on regulation. The Greeks have invested eye-watering sums in fleet renewal recently on the back of very strong markets, but few have really stumped up the extra cash for a dual-fuel vessel. Economics is the main excuse for sticking to fossil fuels, and there was a quote, "Whoever is cheaper gets the business," from Evangelos Marinakis of Capital Maritime, but availability and safety did rear their head as well. We'll see how this viewpoint from the owners stands up to the economic changes coming, along with Fuel EU Maritime and whatever the IMO eventually does in terms of carbon pricing and everything else. When you read Nick's piece linked below in the show notes, you should get a clear idea of his thoughts on the matter, though. Marcus?
Yes, indeed.
What were you up to in the first week of June?
Yes, indeed, you do get a clear thought of, clearly what Nick thinks about the matter in that piece. It's really well worth a read as well. I'm going to do something really quite different, and that's to do with the port sector, which I'm focusing quite a bit in this episode, actually. In its 4th year, the World Bank and S&P Global Market Intelligence Container Port Performance Index is starting to become a regular fixture, and its 2023 edition covered some 405 ports and was not without its controversy, it must be said. The top 5 were relatively stable, with Yangshan, part of the world's largest container port of Shanghai, also retaining the title of being the most efficient. Also staying in second place was the port of Sahala in Oman. The only new entrant in the top 5 was Malaysia's port of Tanjung Palapas, which moved up from 6th place in the previous year. East Asian and Southeast Asian ports dominated the top 20, taking some 13 of the 20 spots. But if we look at some of the other major markets, now, for example, the US, which was the focus of much port congestion during the pandemic, the highest placed port in the US is only in position 53, and that was Charleston. The East Coast gateway of New York and New Jersey ranked at 92 in the survey, while the US West Coast gateway ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles ranked at positions 373 and 375 respectively. But they weren't actually the people who were most unhappy about the report. That was the African nation of Djibouti, which saw its port plunge over 350 places between the 2022 and 2023 rankings, from the position 29 in 2022 to 379 in the latest edition of the report. The government of the Republic of Djibouti issued a statement on the matter, and one of the things it said was, "This decline of over 350 places in a single year is obviously absurd and does not reflect any tangible reality on the ground." Yeah, it's safe to say they were not happy about the report was put together and the rankings. It will be very interesting to see how the next year's report comes together for looking back at 2024 with everything that's currently going on with the Red Sea crisis and port congestion. So that will be an interesting one in 12 months' time. If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice. Gary, on to you for week 2, and I think you're sticking with ports.
Yeah, sort of. The main federal channel into Baltimore has been fully reopened after Dali was floated away and some 50,000 tons of bridge debris was removed from the Patapsco River. The Fort McHenry Federal Channel is finally back to its 700-foot width, which will enable two-way traffic again for large vessels, after a long period of various small alternative channels being established around the fallen bridge and the container ship Dali that was stuck there until quite recently. Hats off to the various agencies under the Unified Command, which was established to coordinate the response to Dali hitting the Francis Scott Key Bridge in late March. Updates from Unified Command have been regular and detailed, including some really interesting pictures of the salvage process taken by the US Coast Guard, which was featured repeatedly on the site. In all, it said 56 agencies and 1,587 responders were involved in the operation, along with 18 barges, 22 tugboats, 13 floating cranes, 10 excavators, and 4 survey boats. Maintenance of the channel now returns to the US Army Corps of Engineers, who do the regular maintenance and will be ensuring that no debris remains to interfere with dredging of the waterway. I expect our updates on this story are due to become less frequent now that the physical task of clearing the wreckage is complete, but expect it to keep appearing in coming years as the legal battles get underway. The NTSB will release their investigation into the incident, and their reports are always really interesting to read. And then there's the impact on insurers, which needs to become clearer over time as well. Marcus, I think it was your turn to go to a show for the second week.
Indeed, it was. In the second week of June, I headed off to the not-so-sunny Rotterdam for TOC Europe for the flagship event in that series on ports and terminals run by our colleagues in Informal Markets. For someone like myself focused on content, I was to be spoilt for choice with 4 different stages covering the container supply chain, technology, safety, and a sort of stage that was a specific focus on international markets. Now, given the rollercoaster nature of container shipping markets in recent years, first with the pandemic and now the Red Sea crisis, there was a strong interest in the market's presentations on the container supply chain stage, including 2 of the most respected analysts in the sector, Peter Sand from Zanetta and Lars Jensen from Vespucci Maritime. Now, for any shipper hoping for lower rates in exchange for the promise of loyalty in the current surging market, Lars pretty much said that that's not going to happen. Asked for learnings from the pandemic, he said the key thing was that there is no loyalty. He cited that Maersk had not raised its rates in line with the market during the pandemic, hoping for loyalty from customers when the downside came. However, when the downside came, Maersk's rates dropped as fast as the broader market, meaning that by Lars's estimations, they had simply given away $16 billion in revenues that the line could have earned by charging market-level rates during the boom. The message was simply, being the nice guy doesn't pay. Looking more at the current market, both Peter and Lars dwell on how a coincidence of Red Sea diversions have soaked up all available capacity, and then on top of this, we've now had port congestion and a demand spike, and this has led to the current surge in container shipping spot rates, the highest levels we've seen since August 2022. If all these factors continue sort of into July, rates could hit the highest levels that we saw during the COVID pandemic. So we're looking well into sort of 5 figures per box there in dollar terms if that transpires. There were many other really interesting presentations over the 3 days, which we covered on Seatrade Maritime News, including real evidence of nearshoring from port data, tackling lithium-ion battery fires, and how African port of Tangier Med is following EU emission rules in what is essentially extraterritorial regulation. So they're all on Seatrade Maritime News, and really, if you're interested in those topics, go and have a read.
We're into week 3 now. We ran an interview on the readiness of oil spill response conventions to deal with spillages of alternative fuels. I conducted this interview with North Standard Head of P&I Claims, Nordics and Northern Europe, Sachin Shanbag. I arranged this call with Sachin to talk about something else, but we ended up having a really interesting chat about how alternative fuels for shipping fall outside of the sort of tight definitions that there are within these oil spill conventions. Oil spills are obviously a big deal for shipping. The industry's reputation has suffered a significant damage in the past from large oil spills, coating coastlines and suffocating animals and their environments in crude oil. Conventions are in place to compensate those affected by spills from bunkers and cargo, as well as making the process of recovering those cleanup expenses much easier. But not so for alternative fuels, really, according to Sachin. I did my best to keep the piece as accessible as possible, so if you're unsure what right of direction against P&I clubs is, or what a persistent oil is, or what the Civil Liability Convention does, then worry not. I didn't either, and Sachin was really great at breaking everything down. Give the piece a read, and you'll find yet another important niche of shipping that you can add to your list of things that need updating and fixing ahead of the adoption of alternative fuels. Over to you.
Yeah, it's amazing the number of things that I think we haven't thought of with things like alternative fuels. And, it's only sort of specialists like that who kind of go, this is not included in the regimes that we've been using for all these years.
Yeah, absolutely. We're lucky there are so many specialists out there in each niche that are aware of these things and working on them quietly.
Indeed, and well worth trying to keep abreast of these things. I'm going to move over to the US, and our correspondent in the US, Barry Parker, enjoys examining the wider sort of political issues that go around shipping. And with the Red Sea crisis and the Dali collision in Baltimore, which Gary mentioned earlier, shipping has been attracting more attention than usual, both from politicians and mainstream media in the States. And this is something that Barry kind of delved into a bit. An area of focus has been the US national merchant fleet and its steady erosion. Much of the vessels under the US flagged fleet and its maritime security programs actually come from international owners with US based shipping owning entities like Maersk and CMA CGM, which have their own US ship owning arms. Barry reports there are bipartisan moves to try and revitalize the nation's maritime sector, with the Congressional Guidance for a National Maritime Strategy, which was launched in May. Barry also explores the opinions of various different commentators on the US maritime sector and covers the regulatory aspect of the Federal Maritime Commission and the Jones Act. A full link to that article will be in the show notes. And now, back to Gary for the final week of the month, and to take us out for this episode, as I will be on leave during that time.
Enjoy your holiday, Marcus. I'll be back in a few seconds. Right, we're slightly in the future, but still in the past for listeners, and I've been in charge for the last week of June. I don't honestly know how it's supposed to work when we're solo on Maritime in Minutes, but I'm going to pick two stories to make sure nobody feels shortchanged. First up, we of course had Day of the Seafarer on June 25, a day for the shipping industry and the wider world to recognise and celebrate the work that seafarers do for us all, and think about the impact it has on our lives, as well as a chance to give thanks. Social media was full of updates on the year's theme of safety, with crews around the world sharing their safety tips and safety priorities on board. Companies and organisations shared their messages of thanks and praise, but I took the opportunity to highlight some challenges facing seafarers. This year's celebration came within a fortnight of an attack by the Houthis on a merchant ship which left one seafarer dead. These violent attacks on civilians with drones and missiles are becoming more effective at hitting the ships that they target, and seafarers are right there in the firing line. While the industry has called for more action to prevent these attacks, they do keep happening, and ships keep being ordered through the area known to be within range of effective attacks. There are broader challenges to seafaring as a profession as well, including crew shortages or the crewing crisis, whatever you want to call it, the need for new skills as technologies advance and green fuels enter the industry, criminalisation of seafarers who are held after accidents or if illicit goods are found on board, and just a lack of opportunities for seafarers to go ashore is a widespread problem. Day of the Seafarer is a great initiative, and I just thought it an opportunity to reflect, as well as sharing those affirming messages on social media. Finally, we'll move from dampening the mood to a gathering of very upbeat shipping folk in New York. Barry Parker was at the Marine Money Conference in New York this week and reported on MSI's Dr. Adam Kent's figures, showing the strength of vessel prices and charter rates compared to the last 14 years. Kent said the black swans are rife at the moment and don't look to be migrating anytime soon. Against the market backdrop, ship owners took to the stage to share their thoughts and were perhaps unsurprisingly rather upbeat. Tony Gurney of Ardmore Shipping said the opportunity to reduce leverage has brought much lower break-even levels for the fleet, and Hafnia's Mikhail Skov said tanker companies have to go through a transformation at some point, and Hafnia was positioning itself for what's to come in the longer period. That piece will be linked in the show notes, or search on Seatrade Maritime News for Black Swans and Peak Oil at the Dawn of a Golden Age. That's a wrap for June. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a month's time to chat about whatever July has in store.